With just days to go before the U.S. votes for its next president, what policy differences are we likely to see from a Trump or Harris administration? And how will Turkiye and countries across Europe and the Middle East react to either candidate winning? I'll break that all down and more here on Straight Talk. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. It's being called one of the most consequential U.S. presidential elections in a generation, not only for Americans, but for the entire world. The two candidates, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, are locked in a dead heat. Tens of millions have already voted early as the world waits for the final ballot to be cast Tuesday night. So how will NATO ally Turkiye and the region adjust to whoever wins the White House? Nili Kozad reports.
The U.S. presidential election is just days away, with polls suggesting that Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are standing neck and neck. The results will undoubtedly have global repercussions, which could vary depending on which candidate emerges as the winner. But for a nation like Turkey, the next U.S. president must navigate complex bilateral relations and a Middle East on the brink of a wider all-out war. Many signals from Harris suggest she will continue much of President Joe Biden's policies. Relations have been tense under the current administration, with Biden being the only U.S. president who has not invited Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan for an official White House visit. Under Trump, U.S.-Turkey relations experienced a different dynamic, focusing on counterterrorism efforts in Syria and increasing bilateral trade. But despite the better optics, tensions remained high due to Turkey's close ties with Russia and its acquisition of the S-400 missile system, leading to Ankara's removal from the F-35 fighter jet program. Turkey's request for F-16s to modernize its fleet is another issue that remains up in the air. A major point of contention between the two NATO allies is their differing views on Israel's brutal war on Gaza, with the U.S. standing firmly by Israel.
We maintain the importance of supporting Israel's right to defend itself, and we are also very adamant that we must see de-escalation in the region going forward, and that will be our focus.
Meanwhile, over in Europe, the war in Ukraine is nearing the 3-year mark. Many analysts suggest that if Harris becomes the next U.S. president, her policy will continue Biden's heavy political and military support for Kyiv. Ankara argues that further military aid will lead to catastrophic results, which could engulf Europe in a prolonged conflict. Instead, Erdogan advocates for dialogue between both parties as a pathway to achieving peace. Trump says he will end the war in 24 hours with a diplomatic solution, a stance which may resonate more with Turkey, which has engaged in its own mediation efforts.
I believe I will be able to make a deal between President Putin and President Zelensky quite quickly.
Ultimately, whether Americans elect a Republican ticket or a Democratic one, effective dialogue to address these ongoing issues may be the only way to move U.S.-Turkey relations towards a better path ahead. Nili Kozad, Straight Talk.
For more, joining me now from Istanbul is Aylin Unver Noi. She's a professor at Halic University. From Washington, D.C., William Lawrence. He's a professor at American University. And Michael Cox. He's a senior advisor at the Global Policy Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. The Super Bowl of elections, the election of the century. It's got my attention. It's got your attention. And before we dive in, I want you guys to determine how we start the show. So I'm going to ask you for your predictions. Who wins the Straight Talk vote Tuesday? Who's going to win U.S. elections? Aylin.
It's a tough question. It's $1 million question. It's really difficult to answer that one because very tight race we are facing. So the swing states will decide which one will win this election.
But who do you think is going to win, though? I want a quick name. What do you feel? What's your instincts say?
And if the candidate was Biden, then I was quickly answered that the winner will be the Trump. But after Harris became the candidate, this is really difficult. But it really depends on what topic is the most influential one. If the problem is economic problem will shape the future of the decision of the American voters, then I can say that Trump will be the next president.
William, your thoughts?
I'm going to go with my colleague at American University, Alan Lichtman, who's predicted 9 of the last 10 elections accurately. He has his 13 keys, and he says Harris.
Okay.
Against what the professor in California who's got the mathematical model, which has been right 3 or 4 times, who got 2016 wrong, who was going with Trump. But it's so close, of course, nobody knows.
Sean, your thoughts?
As both my colleagues have indicated, it is a very close election, and of course it'll be the swing states, particularly states like Pennsylvania, that will determine it. I am leaning towards a Harris administration in the near future, but just by the slightest of margins.
Okay, then let's start with Harris. What type of differences or what type of impacts could we expect from a potential future Harris administration? Aylin, what are your expectations, especially in the region?
Actually, my expectation from her is the continuation of some Biden foreign policies in the region. There are signs of this continuation she already made. I mean, for instance, she will continue to support Ukraine against Russia and provide the same support to the European allies within the NATO. And at the same time, by the way, she continued the Biden administration policy in supporting the Netanyahu Israel, but at the same time harshly criticizing killing of civilians. So this means that still the value-based and foreign policy will be on the agenda, but it will have some limits because of the situation in the Middle East. And the escalation of the conflict into a regional war will become one of the issues the Harris administration will continue to pursue as a foreign policy. So Philip Cardin will be the advisor, and so we can predict that what kind of policies she can follow with respect to relations with Turkey. And for instance, I am not expecting any counterproductive policies that can harm Turkey-US relations.
William, it looks like Gaza will be the most pressing issue that a potential Harris administration will inherit. So do you expect anything different, or do you expect any initiatives that could bring about a breakthrough?
Let me just adjust the premise to the question. I think Gaza will be number 2. And I think Ukraine, NATO will be number 1 because it's such a huge issue geostrategically for the United States and how that relates to Russia and China and everything else, North Korea. But with Gaza, with the U.S. wanting Gaza over, which is very clear with all of the failed shuttle diplomacy with Bill Burns and Amos Hochstein, in recent weeks and months, Kamala Harris knows well that the U.S. has not used its leverage sufficiently with Israel to get this finished. And so she will increase the use of U.S. leverage on Israel, which probably won't yield short-term results, but will bring this to a close a little more quickly than Trump or Biden would have done. So I expect some progress on the Gaza-Lebanon issue more than we would have seen otherwise.
Sean, Williams says that Ukraine is going to be top priority. Do you agree with him? And regarding Ukraine, will there be initiatives towards opening diplomatic channels, or will it be continuing financial and military support?
The Harris campaign has stated that Ukraine will definitely be a priority, and that Vice President Harris will continue essentially President Biden's policies by giving nearly unlimited support for Ukraine against Russian aggression. Harris will work to get congressional backing, hopefully bipartisan backing, that has lagged somewhat over the last year as Americans have tired of being engaged in international conflict. The one real weakness of the Harris campaign has been that Donald Trump has been able to take her to task about foreign speculation and using U.S. wealth and U.S. monies to support foreign entities without his base understanding the value of this. So Harris is going to definitely reiterate what the support for Ukraine means, not just with respect to the Ukraine-Russian conflict, but to the larger scale of European relations and Asian relations as well.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he really likes leadership diplomacy, but under U.S. President Joe Biden, we saw an institutionalization of the relationship between Turkey and the United States. Do you think that Kamala Harris will continue that, or will we see a trip to Ankara by Harris or an invitation to Washington for Erdogan?
As I said, we will see a kind of continuation of the Biden's policies because during the time of Biden administration, the U.S. administration was reluctant to get in contact with the Turkish counterparts. So when we see the exchange of communication, actually, it started after the war in Ukraine when the United States need Turkey. And so when Turkey played an important role in the mediation efforts, including the grain deals or exchange of prisoners between Russia and the United States. So and then this exchange between the institutional counterparts takes stage. But I don't expect the leader-to-leader relationship as the Erdogan and Trump had during the previous term of Trump administration. I don't expect such a leader-to-leader, the exchange of views or communication way, because the Harris administration will continue to prefer to institutional channels to communicate.
William, a lot of tensions between Israel and Iran. How would a possible Harris administration deal with Tehran?
That's a really tough question. I would say that the posture of Congress, which doesn't do nuance, whoever wins in Congress, and we haven't made our predictions there yet, is going to be to try to increase pressure on Iran. And I think Philip Gordon, her main advisor, and herself, I think Kamala Harris leans more towards the Obama foreign policy insofar as it has differences with the Biden foreign policy, and it's going to look for a softening of confrontation with Iran, within that context. And so, I would predict, discussions. They won't bring Rob Malley back, but discussions of going back to the JCPOA, appreciation of wherever Iran dials back, the way in which the U.S. Severely contained both Israeli strikes on Iran to make them a little less provocative is an indication of that desire for less tensions with Iran, at least directly with Iran. So I do predict an effort, at least, for the president to buck Congress and try to have a more constructive relationship with Iran.
Sean, I'm about to switch over to Trump, but one last question regarding Harris. Syria's been quiet. It's basically frozen right now, the situation there. That's another issue that Harris is going to inherit if she wins the election. What are your thoughts on her policies towards Syria?
I think she'll definitely maintain Biden's policies with respect to Syria. There is, as you said, it's frozen. There's no real movement there. The only way that Syria would rise in prominence with respect to Harris's consideration, should she win the presidency, is within the greater context of the conflict going on in the Middle East between Iran, between Israel, Lebanon, and Israel, and the like. For the time being, Syria is sidelined.
Okay.
It's as simple as that.
Okay, Aylin, former U.S. President Donald Trump, if he wins November 5th, regarding the relationship with Turkey, what's your major expectation under a second Trump administration?
And as I said, leader to leader communication will start again. So we have this is what we have witnessed in his first term. So, but this doesn't mean that everything's going to be all right in terms of Turkey-US relations, because we had ups and downs. And we faced with some sanctions during the time of Trump, or extra the tariffs and the Turkish goods exported to the United States. So in terms of economy, there will be continuation of these kind of protectionist measures in the America First understanding of the Trump administration economic policy. So this will, of course, affect the Turkey-US relations in terms of economy, despite these targets to achieve like $100 billion US dollar between two countries. At the same time, there was a commitment made by Trump administration withdrawal of the U.S. military forces from the northern Syria. This was the decision taken at the time of Trump administration. But we also have seen that this has also had limits, because U.S. continued to support the YPG, the PKK affiliation, terrorist groups in Syria. So the situation in the Middle East, the rising tension between Iran and the Israel also makes the situation more complicated, and took some the brave decisions, or to complete all these decisions or made commitments made previously by the Trump administration in terms of to improve the Turkey-US relations is more difficult than the previous term, as we have seen. But what Turkey is expecting from the next Trump administration is to understand that Turkey's legitimate national security concerns that might emerge if the region another chaotic or the regional war erupts in the region. So because Turkey is the one of the country mostly affected from this conflicts in the region, like terrorism or mass immigration flow from the region, as you know.
William, Trump said, I'm the best friend Israel ever had. He also moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Now, a lot's changed in 4 years. Is Trump still the best friend Israel ever had, or does he have problems and issues with Netanyahu if he wins?
He won't necessarily have problems with Netanyahu, although his exchanges with Netanyahu have been very interesting, because instead of criticizing Netanyahu's policies, he often criticizes Netanyahu for having a PR problem. And the PR problem is too much killing, getting too much press coverage. And so that raises a question. Does solving this PR problem mean pushing for an end to the conflict, which could be possible, or does solving the PR problem mean simply doing more to cover up what Israel's doing? Best friend of Israel, of course, that's a whole nother topic, because I'm not sure the best long-term friend of Israel would be one pushing for more violence towards the neighbors. Although, you know, a lot of people in the Republican Party would see it that way. So ultimately, Trump likes to be erratic. Trump likes rebuffing U.S. allies and moving towards more autocratic figures. And Trump likes transactional diplomacy that's all about making America more money, while pushing aside conflicts to the extent possible, rather than solving conflicts. And so I think the carte blanche that Netanyahu has would be wider with Trump, but with limits. You know, if Netanyahu crosses certain lines that Trump thinks damages his own personal reputation, then he might apply some of that American leverage against Netanyahu.
Sean, in the previous Trump administration, we saw spearheaded by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former NSA Bolton, a maximum pressure on Iran. It doesn't look like Bolton or Pompeo are going to be back if Trump wins. Is maximum pressure on Iran coming back, or will we see a softening on that policy?
No, absolutely, there will be maximum pressure on Iran. Trump likes to project a tough guy image, that he's strongly representing U.S. interest. And he has consistently stated that the Biden administration, the previous Obama administration, are being too soft with Iran. He wants to be a tough guy. He wants to be a world leader who uses the threat of force to compel countries that are going against U.S. interests to push them in line with U.S. interests. So he will definitely take a very hard stance with respect to Iran, increasing sanctions, increasing threats against them, regardless of any destabilizing factor that may introduce to the current conflict going on in the Middle East.
Aylin, Trump's also promising his supporters that he's going to bring peace to Ukraine. Now, is that a promise you think he can keep?
This is what he is arguing that, and of course, as from the beginning, also he argues that if he continues to become the president of the U.S., there will be no war in Ukraine. So after he becomes the president, then he will cut the support to Ukraine, and then there will be a peace agreement. But most probably this peace agreement will be between the Putin and the Trump administration, and then we don't know what kind of situation is expecting the American allies in the European countries, including Turkey. For Turkey, this is what we are actually expecting: the peace in our northern neighbors and southern neighbors. But at the same time, this might also create a kind of an understanding for Ukraine or the other allies, like if they believe in the support of America, then they can face with this kind of a challenge. They can give up their support. So this is a kind of, create a kind of a problem for the America, a continuity of the foreign policy of the United States. So this is another problem that we maybe think about, because when the withdrawal of Afghanistan, the allies of the United States also started to think about that, their relations with the United States, because there is no continuation of the U.S. foreign policy. This is another issue. Maybe the U.S. administration, whoever wins the election, should think about.
William, I want to give you the same question, because I think this is probably the issue where both candidates differ the most, war on Ukraine. So what are your thoughts regarding Trump and his possible initiatives as a possible future president of the United States?
I really like the careful language in the previous answer, but let me push that a little further down the road. Trump won't bring peace to Ukraine on Ukrainian terms. Trump will try to compel peace on Ukraine on Russian terms. We've long known that Trump has a deep, secret, and confusing relationship with the Russians, based on likely hundreds of millions of dollars invested in his businesses way back when they were in trouble in the 1980s and 90s. And that's why it's been so confusing when Trump consistently bows to Putin again and again. And that's why he says he can solve this on day one, because he will try to move in the direction of capitulating to Putin one way or another. Now, how do you force a Ukrainian capitulation, once you've withdrawn weapons from Ukraine? And will the U.S. withdrawing weapons from Ukraine dovetail with the rest of the world withdrawing weapons from Ukraine? That might not be a short-term project. But, basically, we're talking about drawing a line across Ukraine and ceding a certain amount of territory in order to get another ceasefire that might last 1 year or 6 years or 10 years, but it won't bring peace to Ukraine. And that's the rub here. What makes my Ukrainian friends all over the world want to go back, and what makes this Ukrainian government want to stop fighting? And I don't think a Trump election, solves the problem in that sense. So we'll have some sort of forced arrangement without a solution. That's my opinion.
Sean, last question to you. It looks like, obviously, war in Ukraine has, at least Trump's possible initiatives, could have NATO nervous, could have America's European allies nervous. How is the relationship with a potential Trump return and that administration with European allies?
European leaders are definitely fearful of Trump's return to the presidency. It was one of the lowest points in U.S. relations with our transatlantic partners and our allies. There was the multiple threats against allies to pay their own share. There was the threat to withdraw America from the alliance. The unpredictability of Donald Trump is a great contrast to the deliberation and methodical approach that a Biden-Harris administration has taken and that Harris would likely continue. The biggest threat, in fact, is Donald Trump's own personal opinion. He may wake up one day and suddenly decide, I don't want to be in NATO anymore, and compel his allies in Congress and his supporters to push this position. And this unpredictability is fearful in terms of conducting international relations. It doesn't normalize relations between states. And Harris administration would definitely have much better relations with our NATO allies. So European leaders are definitely pushing for a Harris win next week.
Aylin, William, Sean, thanks for helping me unpack what U.S. elections could look like for Turkiye, the Middle East, and Europe. Thank you for that discussion. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.